The Lexus IS has been the source of a ton of rumors over the last few years. There was a wide expectation that 2021 would bring us an entirely new model with a new inline-six engine under the hood. But instead, Lexus went in a different direction, and they've decided to give the IS a pretty thorough refresh for 2021. But the important thing to know about that is that the bulk of the IS remains the same as the previous model year. So under the hood, we have the same engines and transmissions, and on the inside, we have about the same kind of room that we had in the last model year. But we get new front bumpers, new rear bumpers, revised suspension designs, new infotainment systems, Lexus's latest active safety systems, and then they rejuggled some of the options around. So you can no longer get the 2-liter turbo in F-Sport trim. Now the F-Sport trim is reserved for the 3.5-liter V6 only. Obviously, the first thing you'll notice is the revised front-end design. We no longer have this accent light, the Lexus swoosh logo right there, divorced from the headlamp module. Previously, it was an entirely separate module. It had its own cutout in the bumper. Now it's integrated into the headlamp. I think this looks much sharper. It also ties in a little bit better with the angles that are going on in the new hood and the new front bumper design and the slightly more pinched Lexus spindle grille that we find up front. Be sure and let me know what you think about the design down there in the comment section. I think that the grille, even though it doesn't appear to have changed radically in terms of size, looks better integrated in the 2021 model year vehicle. We still have a radar adaptive cruise control sensor behind that large Lexus logo, and the model that we're looking at doesn't have any fog lights or anything like that down lower. Before I get much further, I should let you know that this is technically a launch event for the Lexus IS, even though I'm filming this in my driveway. This is all due to the ongoing global pandemic. Rather than flying somewhere to see the vehicle before it goes on sale, Lexus shipped a bunch of us the vehicle in advance, so I'm filming this a few weeks before you're actually watching this. And the important thing to know is that there's still a bunch of specifications that Lexus has yet to release. This model has the same wheelbase as the previous Lexus IS at 110.2 inches long, but we don't know whether the overall length of the vehicle from the tip to the tail is the same as before. I suspect it's going to be pretty darn similar. That previous model was 184.3 inches long, making it almost exactly the same length as the Genesis G70, the Jaguar XE, and the Mercedes-Benz C300. In the compact luxury sedan segment, most of the models are clustered very, very close together, unless we're talking about something like a Cadillac CT5 or the Infiniti Q50, which are definitely on the long side of things. Almost all the competition is going to be right about the same size as this. Moving to the rear, the changes are a little bit less radical than the front. We have full LED taillamp modules, and that includes amber turn signals and LED backup lights as well. Even though I'm driving the model with the 2-liter turbocharged engine, we get dual exhaust down there at the bottom of the bumper. Lexus says that the styling cues that we see on the 2021 IS are going to work their way across the rest of the Lexus lineup over time. So that's going to be this Lexus L shape on each taillamp module and then the light bar that connects the two. Once upon a time, Lexus called this particular trim the IS200T, but you'll notice it now says IS300 on the rear. A number of years ago, Lexus decided to make all of their latest driver assistance technologies standard across the lineup. And that's certainly different than we see in most of the European competition, where a lot of the active safety technologies and driver assistance technologies remain optional. For 2021, the IS gets the latest edition of Lexus's active safety suite. We get forward collision warning, autonomous emergency braking, pedestrian and cyclist detection, their lane centering system, full speed range radar adaptive cruise control, auto high beams, and this model has blind spot warning and rear cross traffic detection as well. If these systems are of interest to you, you should know that you'll find them on the IS at a much lower price point than in any of the German competition. Now, if you get the IS 350, then the numbers on the trunk lid do indicate displacement, but that's the only IS trim that does. The engine lineup is a little bit convoluted here. The base engine is the 2-liter turbocharged engine that we're driving today. It's a 4-cylinder engine that produces 241 horsepower and 258 pound-feet of torque. This engine is mated only to an 8-speed automatic transmission and only rear-wheel drive. This is the IS 300. If you want the IS 300 all-wheel drive, then we get a 3.5-liter V6 engine that produces 260 horsepower and 236 pound-feet of torque. That engine is mated only to a 6-speed automatic, not the 8-speed automatic that we find behind this engine. The all-wheel drive system normally sends 70% of the power to the rear axle, 30% to the front, but it can split power 50-50 when needed as well. Then we get the IS 350, which also uses a 3.5-liter V6 engine, but in the 350, the engine produces 311 horsepower and 280 pound-feet of torque. That engine is mated to an 8-speed automatic transmission if you choose rear-wheel drive, 6-speed automatic if you choose all-wheel drive. Although the 0 to 60 times are fairly similar the one to the other, you'll get 5.6 seconds in the rear-wheel drive model, 5.7 if you choose all-wheel drive. I'm a little disappointed that Lexus didn't take the opportunity to redesign the drivetrains so that the all-wheel drive models could get the 8-speed automatic transmission or perhaps the 10-speed automatic transmission from the Lexus LS. And while they're at it, the Lexus LS's excellent twin-turbo V6 wouldn't have been a bad engine under this hood either. As a result of the engine lineup and the fact that the Lexus IS is heavier than the average German competitor. This is going to be slower than the average European competitor. In fact, the IS 350 is going to be about as quick 0 to 60 as something like the Mercedes-Benz C300, the base version of the C-Class. The front seats in the trim that I'm driving today come in at 7 out of 10 points, mainly because there's no adjustable lumbar support at all in this particular model. Now, if you get different versions of the IS, then you do get adjustable lumbar functionality. We have a manual tilt telescopic steering column with a pretty decent range of motion. Bear in mind that the compact luxury segment is full of stiff competition, and the IS also oddly enough competes with the Lexus ES, and I do find the seats in the ES to be a little bit more comfortable than the IS. Combined legroom in the IS is more or less middle of the pack. There's certainly going to be options that are roomier, but there are also going to be a few options that are less roomy than this. You can see sitting here behind myself, I have about 4 inches of legroom left. Headroom, on the other hand, is a little bit more limited. If I try and put my head back to the headrest back there, I do have to crane my head to one side in order to fit. But if I were trying to sit in a bit more of a normal seating position, then my hair is just brushing the ceiling, and I could probably do this comfortably for an hour or two if I needed to. Since this is a rear-wheel drive vehicle, there's a pretty aggressive hump right there in the middle, and there's really a lot less room going on there. The front seats move pretty far back in their tracks. So this seat is all the way back in its tracks, suitable for a 6'5" person I had in here. My knees are definitely digging into the seat back, and the footwell is a little bit cramped. The rear seats fold in a 60-40 fashion, but they don't fold flat with the cargo area in the rear. They're about 6 to 7 inches higher up. The 60% side is over here on the driver's side of the vehicle, the 40% side on the passenger side. Behind the trunk lid, we find just under 11 cubic feet of storage space in the IS. That puts this on the small side of the compact sedan category. That said, as with the rest of the dimensions on the IS, most of the compact sedans that this competes with are clustered very close together in terms of most of their specifications. So overall length, overall width, interior dimensions, and cargo dimensions are all pretty close in most of the compact luxury sedans. One of the reasons that this cargo area is a little smaller than the European competition is the fact that we have a spare tire back here, and in many of the European competitors, there isn't even a spare tire well to put one if you wanted to. Thanks to the spare tire and the handy helper handle, I'm going to give this trunk 8 out of 10 points in the Trunk Comfort Index. Since this is a refresh, not a redesign, large portions of this interior remain the same. We have a pretty standard sized moonroof right here over the driver and front passengers' heads. We have height adjustable shoulder belts and two-way adjustable headrests for the driver and front passenger. These seats are not upholstered in leather, but one of Lexus's excellent leather imitations. We have perforations in the seat back and seat bottom cushion because these seats are both heated and ventilated. The bolstering in the seat back cushion is pretty aggressive. We also have some fairly aggressive seat bottom cushion bolsters, but these are not adjustable. And again, we have no adjustable lumbar support. The front doors are made from a variety of different materials. We have the same upholstery that we found on the seats right there in red with some contrasting stitching. And then we have some soft touch plastics for the upper section of the door, injection molded plastics right there at the top, and then harder injection molded plastics down there at the bottom of the door, basically the same as we find in the rest of the luxury competition. And then we have some large bottle holders down there at the bottom by that speaker grill. The dashboard style has changed a little bit, but it still looks very much like the previous model year. We have a slot-style glove compartment over here on the passenger side. I was able to fit some of the larger tablet computers in there. About 10 to 11 inches should be fine. The big change inside is right here in the middle of the dashboard where we find two new infotainment systems for 2021. There's a standard 8-inch system, and then there is this optional 10.3-inch system. The touchscreen certainly makes interacting with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto an awful lot more intuitive. They've also moved the screen closer to the driver to make that a little bit easier to use. However, if we go over to the Lexus native interface, you'll notice that this interface was not redesigned really to work better with the touchscreen. So there's certain things that you still have to use the controller in the center console for. For instance, if we're over here on the maps, there's no way to get to the apps, integration, etc. any other way. So I click some of these icons on this side and get, for instance, the split screen map, some of these other options right there, little climate control readouts, or I can collapse that back in, but there's no way to get back to the main menu. I have to press the menu button in the center console, then I get the pop-up menu that allows me to take me over to apps integration, for instance, if I didn't have my smartphone plugged in, the phone interface, audio interface, destination, climate controls, setup, that sort of thing. I think this is kind of an odd omission. I really wish there was a home button on some of these screens that would make it easier to switch between options in the system without using the Lexus controller in the center console. To the left of the screen, we find the engine start-stop button, two large air vents, an analog clock right there. We still have basically the same controls for the climate control system that we found before. This is a touch slider for the temperature control right over here. And then we have some physical buttons for the rest of the system settings. There's still a single slot optical player right here, power and volume knobs. The model that we're driving has the optional Mark Levinson audio system. You'll find the controls for the heated and ventilated seats just below that, and the heated steering wheel right there hiding behind the shifter. This is one of Lexus's gated shifters. It has a manual mode over here to the left. And then here we find the Lexus controller touchpad. This no longer uses the joystick-like controller that we first found in the IS, but I don't really find this that much more intuitive to use. On the other hand, as I said before, you will need to get familiar with this menu button right here because that's the only way to pull up the menu to switch between those apps at the moment. There's a back button and a dedicated map button as well. I found myself simply using this module only for the menu button and then the touchscreen for everything else. Over here we have the drive mode selector. You can choose between Eco, Sport, and a normal mode right there. There's a snow mode, auto brake hold, and the button to disable the traction control system. I had no problem fitting large takeout drinks in those two large cup holders. We then have a padded center armrest, again the same sort of material that's going on the seats. If we open that up, we find a fairly shallow storage area. This is where we find the two USB inputs, the auxiliary input, and a 12-volt power port. On the driver's side, we have a fairly traditional 4-dial instrument cluster with a color multifunction display in the middle. That's controlled via a joystick-style button arrangement on the steering wheel. It gives us our pretty basic trip computer readout information, turn-by-turn navigation directions, infotainment readouts, and of course the readouts from the active safety systems as well. As with other Lexus vehicles, inside this display is where you would adjust the way that the active safety systems behave. The steering wheel is a thickly rimmed 3-spoke design. We have a pretty chunky bottom spoke right there, and you'll notice that the cruise control stalk turns with the steering wheel. On the back of the steering wheel, we have paddle shifters up on the right, down on the left. One thing that surprised me about the steering wheel is that the airbag cover and then these side spoke covers are hard plastic. They do look like they should be softer materials like we find on the doors or on the dashboard, but they're actually pretty hard. This joystick arrangement controls that multifunction LCD, and then we find controls for the adaptive cruise control system right here. That's the distance button, and then the rest of the controls are on that stalk. Lane keeping there. There's a page change button also for that multifunction LCD and a back button. And then on this side, we find buttons for the infotainment system, as well as some dedicated phone buttons. Out on the road, 0 to 60 happens in 6.9 seconds if you choose this base 2-liter turbo. That's the same 0 to 60 time I got the last time I tested the same engine in the IS. And of course, that's quite logical because this weighs about the same as the previous model year IS, and we get the exact same engine. Perhaps the most important thing to know about the IS out on the road is that 0 to 60 acceleration times, regardless of the version of the IS you look at, are going to be slower than the direct corollary in the European competition. 6.9 seconds is significantly slower than the Mercedes-Benz C300 or the base versions of the BMW 3 Series. For 2021, Audi has also updated the A4 and the engine has become more powerful, so its 0 to 60 time is probably also going to be faster than the base model that we're driving today. Because of the 0 to 60 times that we see out of this 2-liter turbo, I have to admit being a little bit disappointed that we no longer have the small V6 engine that we used to find in the Lexus IS. That engine wasn't terribly swift, but it was really cool because it had an interesting sound to it. It sounded sort of like a little sewing machine. It was a very, very smooth engine. And this 4-cylinder engine is a little bit gruffer, a little bit rougher around the edges, as you'd expect out of a 4-cylinder engine versus a V6. But if it's not really going to be that much faster, I think I liked the old 6-cylinder engine instead. Now, after you get over the acceleration times, everything else about the Lexus IS is incredibly competitive. Braking distances in this model, again keeping in mind this is the base trim essentially, came in at 118 feet. That's definitely a short stopping distance, even though the Lexus IS is a little bit heavier than some of the German competition. But where the IS really shines is the suspension tuning, the steering feel, and the handling ability. Because the IS has a level of steering and handling precision that we simply don't find anymore in the Germans. BMW has definitely been taking their product line upmarket, and that has meant turning the 3 Series into, I guess, the new Mercedes in some ways, and they've certainly given up handling precision as a result. If you have this out on a track or out on your favorite winding mountain road, and you start pushing this harder, and you're driving a BMW 3 Series along the same road, this definitely has a handling precision and handling feel that is not matched currently in the German lineup for the same price. Now, clearly there are going to be some excellent performing German options out there, but they're going to be a lot more expensive. Of course, the tricky thing is that if you are out on an autocross track or a larger track, then the German options are still going to be faster because they're going to be able to accelerate, they're going to be faster in the straight lines. This will catch up in the corners, but ultimately those other options are going to be a bit quicker. But if you're looking for something with a bit more steering feel, a better on-center feel, I think, and just better handling dynamics in general, that's certainly going to be the Lexus IS. Now, the other twist here is that there are a few entries in the luxury compact sedan segment that combine the level of precision that we find here with more of the urgency that we find in the Germans. I think that the Jaguar XE does an excellent job at combining those traits, and the Genesis G70 does a pretty decent job as well, although it's not going to be quite as sharp as the Lexus. When tuning the suspension in this IS, it's clear that the Lexus engineers were obsessed with feel. Not necessarily absolute grip numbers, because you will find higher grip numbers in some of the competition, but generally speaking, those are going to be competitors with different tires than the model that we have on this one. This has 235 with all-season tires. Obviously, if you put summer tires in this, the grip level would increase. As with most of the competition, the ride in the IS is definitely firmer than something like the Lexus ES. And this is where the Lexus lineup is a little interesting, because if you want that softer, more relaxed experience, there's the Lexus ES, but if you want something that's sharper and more European feeling, then there's the Lexus IS. Bearing in mind that most of the competition is similarly firm, I'm going to give this a B, but again, keep in mind if you want something softer, there is going to be that Lexus ES, but it's really in a different category. As with previous generations of the IS, the suspension is excellently designed. This definitely does not get upset over broken pavement or on rougher road surfaces like this, even if you're pushing the car harder in the corners. This has a really stable tune to it. In my cab noise test at 50 miles an hour, I measured 72 decibels in this cabin, so I'm going to give this a B+ when it comes to cabin noise. You will find some quieter options in the compact luxury segment, but not too many. If you want a quieter cabin, that may be another reason that you might want to take a look at the Lexus ES, because the ES does come across as perhaps a little bit more isolated from the road, especially road noise seems to be better controlled in the ES. Bearing in mind that I've only had the IS for about 48 hours and about 120 miles, my fuel economy average so far has been 21.2 miles per gallon. That puts this below the EPA current estimates that Lexus has given me. Now, Lexus has said that those numbers are not 100% final, so they may adjust by the time the official EPA numbers are released. And unfortunately, I don't have official EPA numbers for the other engines available in the IS, but I suspect that they're going to be pretty similar to the 2018 and 2019 model year vehicles. Any way you slice it, fuel economy is going to come in behind a lot of the European competition, and oddly enough, behind the Lexus ES as well. The Lexus ES is an interesting twist in this sort of compact sedan segment, because even though the ES is more BMW 5 Series sized, its price tag puts it in direct competition with the Lexus IS. Now, clearly the ES is not going to be anywhere near as much fun as this IS. Again, the IS is all about handling precision. This is the kind of vehicle where it's very easy to drive at its limits because it's so communicative, the chassis is so well tuned, and that is not the way you describe the Lexus ES at all. The Lexus ES is a classic soft marshmallow in comparison. What's always intrigued me about the IS versus ES battle is that, generally speaking, the ES has outsold the IS, and by enormous margins. So I would say clearly a lot of shoppers out there are a bit more interested in an isolated ride, higher fuel economy, and a bigger back seat than they are about driving precision. And that is a little bit sad. But that also likely explains why 2021 is a refresh of the IS, not a complete redesign, because the IS simply doesn't sell in the same numbers as the Lexus ES. On the other hand, if you're looking for something that is certainly an awful lot more fun to drive out on your favorite winding mountain road, and you want that classic Lexus reliability proposition, then the IS is exactly the right sedan for you. For my usual complete comparison section, you will have to wait until I can get my hands on the IS 300 or 350 for a complete week, so I can run it through our usual battery of comparisons and tests. When I was driving the IS this week, I had only about 4 hours to actually drive the vehicle. The rest of the time was spent filming the vehicle. I didn't have enough time to really run it through its paces. I also had no idea how much it cost, what the EPA fuel economy ratings for the vehicle would be just yet, and there were a lot of other specifications that were still just a little bit up in the air. But now I know how much it's going to cost, so let's dive into the pricing. It's going to start at $39,000 even. That's, of course, before the $1,025 destination fee. The base version is the only model that will have the 2-liter turbocharged engine in it. If you want all-wheel drive, that'll set you back $41,000, but we lose the 8-speed automatic transmission, as I mentioned before. You gain a V6 engine rather than the 2-liter turbo. If you want the IS 350, you get the V6 as well, 8-speed automatic transmission again for $42,900. You can also get the IS 350 with all-wheel drive, but again, that ditches the 8-speed automatic in favor of the older 6-speed. That'll set you back $44,900. Pricing is notably less than some of the German options, so comparably equipped BMW and Mercedes models are certainly going to be more expensive. The BMW 330i, for instance, starts at $41,250 with a turbocharged engine, 8-speed automatic, and rear-wheel drive. If you get all-wheel drive on your 330i, that will set you back at least $2,000 more than the Lexus, but keep in mind that BMW does give you a more modern automatic transmission in that model. The value proposition on the Audi A4 is pretty compelling. At $39,100, it doesn't have as much power as we find in the base IS. It's not going to feel quite as much fun out on the road either, but all-wheel drive is standard. Of course, the most aggressively priced entry in this segment has to be the Genesis G70 at $36,000. It significantly undercuts the IS200. There's some areas where the G70 feels less refined than the Lexus IS, both on the inside, on the outside, and while you're driving it out in your favorite winding mountain road. But the G70 is significantly less expensive. The exception to that is the twin-turbo V6 option in the G70 that is notably more expensive than the V6 in the Lexus IS, but you get an awful lot more power and an awful lot more performance out of that twin-turbo V6. The other important thing to know about the G70 is that even though it's only been on the market for a very short time and it's still pretty competitive with the Lexus IS, it's going to get a pretty significant refresh next year. It's going to get a new interior, new exterior design, putting it more in line with the G70 and the larger G90 sedans. If my recent experience with the G80, GV80, and G90 are anything to go by, that new G70 is probably going to have one of the most refined interiors in this segment. I suspect, however, that the Lexus IS will still have a little bit of an edge on it when it comes to driving refinement. The IS really does have a great feel out on the road. But I think the toughest competitor for the IS has to be the Lexus ES, and that's probably why the ES outsells the IS by about 4-to-1. In many ways, the ES and the IS are polar opposites within the Lexus portfolio. The ES is much softer tuned, it's quieter inside, it's more isolated from the road, it's isolated from pretty much everything out there in terms of the steering, the handling feel, all of that going on. There's also an available hybrid system if you want to save on gas. The IS, on the other hand, is designed for driving entertainment, handling precision, handling feel, not necessarily acceleration, but as a result, the cabin certainly doesn't feel as isolated, it's not as quiet, the ride is definitely firmer as well. Be sure and let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section below. Be sure and stay tuned for the full review once I can get my hands on the Lexus IS. And of course, be sure and check out the new AOA merch store. You can see shirts right like this one. There's a design on the side of your screen if you want to see what this shirt is all about. Word of warning, at the moment on AOAmerch.com, there is just the one t-shirt design. This is going to be joined by about 6 or 7 additional designs, hopefully by the time Christmas rolls around. But you can check them out over there and of course, join the AOA merch mailing list and be notified if there's any new merch available. Find me over at Facebook.com/AlexNautos if you want to see what I'm driving this week, and over at Instagram if you want to see the lighter side of things. I'll see all of you later.